one of the things that gives me a superpower, if you will, and Cernovich as well, is that we're going to say things that we think are true, even if you don't like them. And we're not going to worry too much about what that does to our career. In my case, my career earnings went, down about 30 or 40% just by talking about Trump. I can't do speeches anymore. That was a huge part of my revenue. I can't do licensing anymore. It would be impossible to do a Dilbert movie if I tried to do that today, because there'd be too many people who would say, "Hey, that guy said something good about Trump that one time."
Right.
Now, I've also said lots of criticisms,
Yeah.
but they don't remember that.
They don't care to. Yeah.
They'll only see me as a team. So it's expensive, and the only people who can do it are the people who work for themselves or find some way to monetize the danger.
Right. Right. And if you can monetize the danger, which I have learned to some degree, given my experience with the doxing. I mean, I don't know to the extent that but I was totally doxed. I had a pen name, totally doxed by Antifa, called me a Nazi, got me fired from my job, banned from coaching Little League, basically stripped away my entire life and identity, my whole resume, grad school, career, everything up in smoke, total ashes. You said your revenue went down some, mine went to completely zero. And I had to sort of jujitsu it all into something productive. And I have been able to do that. But not the people who are going to be best at that game aren't going to sell out. So I wonder to what extent, if you're all, or the independent sort of pirate outlaw in the Bronze Age pervert lingo, continues to gather strength. Power plays, that's basically what history is all about, right? Big power plays and struggle for power. I wonder how it plays out 5 to 10 years. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, like I said, there's a new player. In the past, you could be a really influential person, but if you didn't have a platform, nobody cared because you couldn't get your message out. Or in the past, you might have a big platform, but you didn't know the skill of persuasion. You didn't know it was something you could actually learn and get better at. But now you got both.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a warlord situation, where people are bringing, 1 million people with them on whatever ride they want to take them. And if they're good at giving rides, that number is going to grow.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. Warlord is a very interesting language to use. Bronze Age pervert uses like outlaws and pirates. And he uses imagery of, like marauding pirates, traveling the globe and taking over things. And it's all imagery. It's not meant to be literal.
I like mine better because the warlord assumes that it's one person who's collected an army.
Yeah.
And that's what social media is more like, these small armies of people who have like thoughts.
Did you read, there was an article that went around called The Internet of Beefs. Did you happen to read that? That was very popular recently. No. It was very, very high quality, very well done. It made the rounds, and it basically described that there's like sort of knight's crests, and people rally around the knight, and it's basically the internet is just an arena for conflict, and then the people who follow and the audiences, they pick up the banner of the person that they support, and they sort of follow them all around the internet, supporting them and going on the ride as you described it. And what's interesting to me is you don't need to have 1 million people following you in order to have actual real world influence. I have 30,000 people, which is nothing, but more importantly, we have 150 guys in the liminal order, which is our sort of private community. And it's there where the real influence is happening, the real impact is happening, because those guys are actually changing their lives and taking steps and measures that impact themselves and their families and their communities. And that to me is sort of the way that you build sort of a long-term response to whatever cultural problems you may see out there. But it is going to be interesting to see what happens. An environment full of warlords isn't a steady state, right? Like that doesn't last forever.
Or is it? Because like I said in my earlier examples, capitalism is a bunch of robber barons and selfish people and jerks and, crooks and liars and, just the worst people in the world. But if your system is built right, it produces gold. So I don't know that having all these warlords with different, idea sets, I don't know that that's bad, because good ideas tend to win.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm calling myself a warlord in this context, I don't mean it the bad way, because I wake up every day. I already made my money. I'm trying to contribute something to society, and I work very hard at making sure that what I do has a real world, individual and collective benefit. And as we talked earlier, a lot of my ideas have bubbled up and become part of society. The idea of talent stacks, the idea of systems being better than goals. Those have always existed in some form, but by capturing them in a really digestible, approachable, accessible form, I was able to popularize them in a way that maybe somebody who didn't have persuasion and writing skills could not have. So
Well,
those are two examples of ideas that go, they leave me, and then they're fighting in the world of ideas, and if they win, it's because they deserved it.
yeah. Well, those two ideas in particular really had an influence on me, and it makes the talent stacking in particular makes the sort of innate desire I have to keep learning things seem more productive than it may have been before, and it also makes learning things which seem to be inconsequential or manual or slightly technical or detailed, makes them all seem much more important too, because the more you continue to add, as you know, to the stack, the more opportunities you have. Like, for example, for me, I feel like I'm rising out of the din of people on social media because I actually have a background that involves economics and finance and public policy. And I've run companies and I've developed real estate and I've written books and I've done podcasts. You just start to add them all up together. And then you have a unique perspective that other people don't have. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've had to engage. When I worked in public policy, I ran charter schools. So I ran charter schools for 10 years as executive director. But I came to it from a real estate perspective and entrepreneurial background. And I just cannot tell you the number of times that I would be sitting there talking to people who are running multi-million dollar organizations that have absolutely no idea how to run multi-million dollar organizations, because all they ever did was work in education. All they ever did was work in education. They just moved up working in education, and all of a sudden they're trying to run these businesses and they really can't. But the talent stack made it something a little bit more concrete for me. And it's also something that I know a lot of guys are really grabbing onto and just continuing to enhance and further sort of the being an autodidact and teaching yourself and expanding your capabilities. And eventually they all just line up and cross up into something that becomes unique. And in this world and in this information environment, being unique is key. And also key is getting discovered. I was having this conversation the other day, and people ask me all the time, how can I get to where you are, or how can I write, or how can I do this? And I tell them, like, being discovered is the hardest part. Everybody has a platform now. But you can even have great content, but getting discovered is very difficult. And I explained my idea was you have to be sort of high variance in order to get discovered. What do you think about that? What advice would you give to somebody who's got talent and a platform, but nobody's listening?
Well, I'm gonna give you an opposing viewpoint here. So, all right.
Yes.
I once asked a table full of high-end publishers and editors, some of the best in New York City, the high-end publishing company, and I asked this question of all the people there. Collectively, they probably had, I don't know, several hundreds of years of experience publishing, and I said, do there exist great writers who can't get published? And every one of them said at the same time, no, doesn't exist. Because, and this is something that I've discovered, anecdotally through my own life, that there is so much hunger for good content that if you produce it, your odds of finding a place for it are closer to 100% than zero. And
The implication of your statement is pretty harsh.
well, hold on. Yeah, hold on. Now it doesn't mean it happens right away. All right. So certainly it takes a little bit of luck, just like everything else. But I'll give you some concrete examples. I had a coworker back when I worked in my cubicle farm at Pacific Bell who decided to write a book. Had never written a book, didn't have any background that would suggest he could, but he saw me write a book and he thought, well, if this guy could write a book, how hard is it to write a book? So he sets his sight on writing a book. comes up with this great story, it doesn't matter what it is, gets published. And they asked him to write another book. Now, of course, they edited all of his writing to, fix it and everything, but they liked his idea. And Stephen King has a book called On Writing that I always recommend.
Great book.
And what he recommends is that you start writing for anybody who will, take it. And that gives you a little bit of a resume for the person who doesn't pay much, but they're hungry for content. And then that gives you another resume to ratchet up. Very good advice. But basically, if you can create content that people want, the market is actually surprisingly easy to get published, at least. Now, to your example, I can see you're biting your tongue here, because it would suggest that you're thinking, well, why don't I have 1 million followers already? Because my content is great. People tell me.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about me. I'm fine.
but you, in fact, are succeeding. So I would say that the evidence suggests that your content is excellent, because the evidence, you got me on your show. You got 30,000 people following you on Twitter, and these things are likely to increase. So I feel that, and by the way, cartooning, let me tell you how hard it was to become a cartoonist. I think, at least at the time, 2,000 people or so would try to submit comics to become syndicated cartoonists, meaning being in newspapers. And out of those 2,000, they might pick 5, and they would work with them for a year, and maybe only 1 or 2 of them they'll decide to go ahead with. So you'd say to yourself, well, the odds of becoming a cartoonist are just so bad. It's like, 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000. But then you talk to the editor who has to pick cartoonists, and you say, how many of those 2,000 are actually good? And you find out, well, 1,000 of them come from the elderly and people in prison. I'm not even making that up.
Makes sense.
Right. And then, there's several hundred of them that don't have any talent at all. Yeah. And, those can be rejected in moments. So finding anybody who can actually do the work of being a cartoonist is so unusual that if you can do it, you're probably going to be a cartoonist, and you're probably going to get paid for it. So if you have talent, people are going to find you. If you don't have talent, that's a problem. But but if you do have talent, you're still going to have to put yourself out there.
Right.
You're going to have to get noticed.
Right. Okay. So my discoverability notion is a little bit still in play, but you're saying that talent will rise, and if you're consistent and you take what I think you wrote about, you called them micro steps, that you will then be able to stack up some success. And I think that I have found that to be true too. When I first started out, nobody was listening. Nobody, not anybody. I would write a blog post and I'd be happy if I got 25 views on it. Right. And I didn't even know how many of those were just, bots or crawlers or whatever. And now I can be pretty sure that like thousands of people are going to see it, and thousands of people buy the book and come see me speak and whatever. So it's very interesting to see it all happen. And I love to see your description of the system, which you also just referenced with Stephen King. Micro steps. And so that's something that I try to get my guys to do. And I know there's a lot of people in sort of the self-help Twitter world that will say and hammer you over the head is just get started, right? Just get started, make some mistakes. I think I just read in your book that, you do it, you make mistakes, you get the most valuable feedback you're going to get. People will tell you exactly what's wrong with it.
The biggest difference between a professional writer who's getting paid for their work and someone who wants to be a professional writer is that the professional writer who does get paid wrote stuff. That's the biggest difference.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people want to be an author, but they don't write anything.
Right.
If you're not writing anything, you're not really moving in that direction.
Right. Yeah. And so in a realistic world today, I mean, if you want to be a writer, you could start, obviously you start your own blog. You could then submit. There's a million websites that are looking for content, probably free at that point. And you're right. You just keep building it over time. So, but there's one other element, time. Time is that other element there. How would you suggest people, find the strength or the stamina to keep going until that moment, that to turn those 10 years into an overnight success, as it were?
Well, Well, a couple of things. And I would agree with Stephen King here. I think he recommends that you keep your day job while you're doing this other thing. So you don't want to be starving while you're getting your other thing off the ground. But one of the things I discovered that seems to be just a universal truth is that things which will eventually work, whether it's a product or you're writing or something, things that will eventually work right away. And they work in a terrible form. And I'll give you some examples. Do you remember the first cell phones? They were like this big brick and it dropped your calls and it was expensive. Basically, everything that could be wrong with the product was wrong with the first cell phones. But people wanted them faster than they could be built. So that told you that that was going to be huge. The first computers were just a mess. They were crashing. They were slow. They needed floppy disks, but everybody wanted them. And you could tell that that wasn't going to stop. So, and Dilbert too, when Dilbert was first published, even though it was a failure for the first several years because it didn't grow an audience, the audience that it did get were just over the moon. So it had a very intense cult following, which I said, aha, you don't get that unless there's something there.
Right.
So I still had to improve my talent to take it to the next level. I was very bad when I first started because I didn't have practice being a cartoonist. But once I had done it for a while, I just ratcheted up the quality and eventually it caught on. I mean, it takes a little luck and you have to hang around a while, but people found me.
Yeah, I guess if the moment for me where I realized that I could actually make something of the writing is when people that didn't know me, who weren't my mom and weren't my girlfriend and weren't my friends, were like, "Oh, I read this is really good." I'm like, "Oh man," somebody who had no invested interest
Right.
in their opinion, and it wasn't going to impact me in any way, or at least their opinion wasn't going to impact them, came out with something positive. And that, for somebody that's in a wanting to develop a creative career and to move forward, that those little pieces, those little pieces of gold, you really got to hang on to them. It's like a little fleck and you just hang on to it in your palm of your hand and you get one more fleck, and you add it up. And before you know it, things start taking off. And I think that's sort of where I am right now. I've finally accepted, because I have issues like a lot of people where you just can't even believe good things that are happening. Like it's so much easier to believe the bad things that are happening to you than the good things. But I finally come to the point, I think now, where I feel confident that I can put out good content and people are into it. But in your case, you said that Dilbert was a failure for the first couple of years. Now that's an interesting statement because I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, it was a syndicated cartoon. That sounds like success. You're getting paid, right? You're getting paid probably every time it gets published." And to a lot of people that screams success, but to you that said failure. How was that a failure?
So I don't know the exact number, but something like 4 out of 5 comics that get launched don't ever pick up an audience, and then they just slowly go away and get canceled. So I was in fewer than 100 newspapers, and they weren't the big ones. The big ones pay more than the small ones. So it wasn't enough to earn a living. I had to keep my day job, and it wasn't growing. So the sales team, they will sell it when it's new, but if it doesn't sell on its own after that, they just move on to the next thing to try to get a hit, because it's sort of about hits, right? It's not about the average cartoon. So once my cycle had ended and they weren't selling it actively, and it was just the number of newspapers that were just canceling and nobody was buying, I looked for something to get attention. And I started putting my email address in the panel of the strip. Thousands of people would write to me every day because they didn't have, and they would say, "We like it when Dilbert's in the office doing work stuff. We don't like it when he's at home." And at the time, he was always at home and only rarely in the office. So I said, well, my background is not art. My background is economics and business school. And I just heard thousands of my customers ask for the same thing. All right. If you could have a better indicator of something that's going to work, it's all of your customers spontaneously ask for an identical thing. And then, so because I'm not an artist, so I don't have the the artistic.
Are you sure you can still say that, Scott? Come on.
Well, not in the sense of artistic integrity. Meaning that I look at my work as, I guess I degrade the quality of my own work to say it's not special, it's a product. People like my product or they don't like my product, but it's just a product. It's not like some amazing part of my body or something. So, I just took the business person's approach and said, well, if that's what they want, I'll make it a business cartoon. And that immediately allowed people to talk about it as the business cartoon. It became the face of downsizing in the 90s. It became the face of the .com thing.
Right.
So just lots of things happened after that one change.